thank you, all of you, so much for coming out and for your interest in the work. It really means a lot to me. I did take some notes, but we'll just see what ends up happening. Was thinking a lot about what I wanted to say about this work and thinking about Durham, my relationship with Durham. And I just want to start by saying that Durham gave me life twice. And I want to talk about, that'll come back and make a little bit more sense a little bit later. But I was born in Durham, this is my hometown. And you know, I always loved Durham, but I loved Durham in the way that you know, it wasn't a place that I had chosen. I just happened to be born here, and I knew it intimately, but I knew it, you know, in the way that you know your parents when you're a child. You know, you don't really examine it or question it. It's just sort of something that is, and you were born into it, and it just is what it is. And so I loved it in sort of that, you know, just intuitive, unthinking way that you do when you're a child. And as a product of the Durham Public Schools and the Durham Arts Council was where I spent a huge amount of my childhood, and a product of a family of people who have very strong ties to Durham. My grandparents came with their 3 kids to Durham in 1966 when my grandfather was offered a position to teach as an assistant professor at Duke. And my grandmother, who was a school teacher, had 2 options. She was offered a position at Friends School, and she was offered a position as the first white teacher at Walltown Elementary School during integration. And so for her, the choice was clear, and she went to Walltown. You know, they loved Durham. They were deeply dedicated to Durham, and they stayed here until the last day of their lives. You know, my uncles left, but my mother stayed here, and she too has very, very deep ties in the community. She has a home child care program of 37 years and is just very entrenched in the local community here. I left Durham when I was 16. I had an amazing opportunity to go to UNC School of the Arts in Winston-Salem, and just, I mean, I cannot overstate what an incredible opportunity and blessing that was for me, and how much I learned there, and how much those 2 years enriched me as a person and as a young artist, and just what an amazing thing it is that our state has that program to offer to high schoolers. Is pretty phenomenal. But as wonderful as that experience was, you know, I found myself, I graduated in 2003, and I was sort of lost. I was at kind of a lost place in my life, and spent the next couple years of my life mostly in Wilmington, and some of that time was great, but in 2005 I found myself in just a very dark and lost and kind of broken place in my life, and I ended up coming back to Durham, and this is where we get into Durham giving me life twice. Coming back to Durham wasn't something that I felt like I was choosing at the time. It really felt like all the forces of the universe were just kind of conspiring to usher me away from where I was and like plant me back here. And I didn't think it was necessarily what I wanted in that moment in time. But you know, the second that I got back to Durham, and I want to also say, you know, during that dark time before I came back to Durham was the one time period in my life where I stopped creating artwork. And that says a lot for me. I mean, it's something that I've always done in one shape or another, pretty much since I was physically capable of holding an implement to create a mark with. And that was the one period that there was none of that. It was just gone. And when I came back to Durham, I will always remember being at my mom's house and my grandparents coming over to welcome me home, and watching them walk to the front door, and my grandfather, who was, anybody who knows him knows he's the most frugal person you have ever met in your life, and he had gotten me this gigantic ice cream cake that was as big as he was, and he was hunched over, and he was just carrying this, you know, welcome home, this giant ice cream cake, and it was welcome home to Durham, and I immediately started creating again when I got back to Durham. Immediately started creating again. And it just became clear to me over and over again that this is where I was supposed to be. I went back to school and I started at Durham Tech, which isn't amazing, I just have to say. I think it's a phenomenal learning institution. And the teachers that I had there really, really cared about teaching. And I have a teacher from there that I still have a friendship with today, which has not been the case at every school that I've attended. And I started teaching art. That was the time period where I started teaching art. Started at Walltown Children's Theater and really, really fell in love with that, teaching children art. And then I ended up transferring to UNC Chapel Hill, staying in Durham. I never had any intentions of living in Chapel Hill. It was very clear I wanted to live here, but I would commute every day to Chapel Hill. I always feel like there's always been very important parts of my life that are in the surrounding areas, but like I'm clear that this is where I want to be rooted. And I majored in art there, and also began to teach at the Durham Arts Council during the summer, which I really loved, and had opportunities to teach some darkroom photography there, which I really loved. And once I graduated from UNC in 2010, I started to just pretty much full-time focus on my artwork and exhibit at a lot of different local places kind of in the Triangle, not necessarily in Durham as much, but so about Durham, I want to say that Durham gave me life twice, and that I feel like I didn't really choose Durham either time, but that I felt like Durham chose me and that I chose to stay, and I'm really grateful for that. More about this specific project. Durham has been changing for a while. This is not some brand new thing, and I obviously had been aware of that. Sort of a pivotal change for me was there was this field, most of you probably are familiar with it, right off of 9th Street, right behind the Irwin Square Mill building. And it's just an empty field. That was all it was. You know that field. And I just, throughout my life, I mean, I remember sitting there in elementary school and, spinning around till you fall down, and sitting there in middle school and drinking milkshakes with my best friend at the time and talking about, it was just a place that was just space, and you could just be, and you could run your dogs around and throw balls, and there's nothing there, but it was so special. And then one day it was just gone. And now it's this like gigantic, mammoth Harris Teeter and this big apartment complex. And that change in particular really, really hit me. So I had been aware of these changes for a while. That happened when I was pregnant with my boys. But something happened after I had my twins in January in 2013, where I started noticing these locations that I had already been noticing for a while, but I was looking at them in a different way. Before they had been, changes in the landscape of my life, and now it was like they were changes in the landscape of our shared lives. Because raising children in my hometown, I had this idea that I would be like, oh, this is where I used to, run around in this field when I was little, and me and Nikki used to take her dogs, and whatever, share these memories, and then those places weren't there anymore. There was something very, very different there, and so they just really started to strike me, and I started seeing these places everywhere that were these physical moments in time where you could see this state of transition and flux, this active change that was happening. And I just felt compelled to capture them. So the series started in April 2014 when my twins were just a little bit over a year old with this piece over there, which is in North Durham, like way down Guest Road. It's a clear-cut forest. And so I went there one day with my tripod and a dear friend who lent me a much-needed set of hands. So I had these two kids that I wasn't going to let run around. They were just new walkers, and between her hands and mine and the tripod, I captured that shot. And I knew at the time that I wanted it to be a series, but I also I didn't know. I didn't have that concept really finely tuned, and I also just didn't know on a practical level how I was going to be able to finance that, make the work possible. But I began anyway. I was like, I'll figure this out later. So I started photographing parents in these locations. You know, the Liberty Cafe, or the Liberty Warehouse over there was one of the next ones that I did. And I decided that I was going to apply for the Ella Fountain Pratt Emerging Artist Grant from Durham Arts Council. So I completed the first 2 pieces in the series with that piece and the Liberty Warehouse. And just a little bit about my art process for this work. It's digital photography. And once I take the shot, I then go in and essentially digitally cut up the pictures into many, many little pieces. Sort of deconstruct the image from being one whole image into each piece is probably deconstructed into about 20 different individual photographs, and then I would print those photographs and I would collage them back together again in a process of kind of reconstructing on canvas. And then once I do that, I go in with paint and I hand paint the images. There are definitely parts of the pieces that have never been touched with paint. And there are also parts of the pieces where the paint is very apparent, and there are parts of the pieces that you're looking at and you don't know that they're painted. And I kind of like that. I like it to not be really clear where that line is of what's painted and what's not. And I use the paint much like you know, some photographers might do some more work in Photoshop, you know, trying to enhance certain areas, trying to, you know, but I think I've always kind of thought of myself as a painter first and foremost, and so that's just sort of my natural inclination with the images. So I applied for that grant with those 2 images and was really, really fortunate to receive that grant, and that was what made this entire series possible. So I just want to say thank you to the Durham Arts Council for that, because not only was it, you know, covered the cost of making the remaining 8 pieces in this series, but it was also just an enormous vote of confidence for me. It was so encouraging as an artist for them to say, like, yes, we believe in this project, we want to see what you're doing, we think it's important. And then another key event early in this process was a friend and art collector who couldn't be here today, unfortunately, Tim Walter, purchased those first 2 pieces in the series, which again, much like that grant, helped with the practical aspects of the project, but also was just felt like such an endorsement of what I was doing. Like, it was just very, very encouraging for me. And so I want to thank both of those people. And I also want to thank Roy Lee for giving me this opportunity to show the work here. You know, like he mentioned, I hadn't ever considered, I was looking for a venue to exhibit the work, and I had never considered through this lens, because I think of it as only showing photography, and while this is photography in my mind, it's much more mixed media. And then I just, you know, took a chance, and he was interested, and so I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to show this work here. And the other thing that is really essential, obviously, was all these families, all these local families that were willing to put their trust in me to participate, because I think agreeing to be a part of anybody's artwork takes a lot of trust. You're turning yourself over and saying, like, okay, I'm trusting you're going to depict me, and I'm putting that in your hand. And so I feel really, really appreciative of that. So, and to everyone, you know, it's been so meaningful to me, the people who have come out to see the work and who have shared their reactions to it. When this exhibit went up, my thought was, like, this is the end of the project. I've been working towards this. I finished the work that my grant stipulated. I have my exhibition, like, the project's done. And in part because of the reactions I've gotten to the work, I've decided that that I'm going to continue on with this project, and I, you know, have to figure out the practical aspects of that once again. But I'm still, you know, I'm doing the shooting part, and I'm just trusting that will come together later. It just feels like I'm not done yet. There's too much that's still ongoing in Durham that I want to capture. I want to talk a little bit about kind of where I'm going from here with this project. I'm going to maintain the same technique and approach, but I'm going to be broadening my scope a little bit, and what I mean by that is the 10 pieces included in the series thus far all depict sites that I happened upon in my day-to-day comings and goings in Durham. Like, these are the maps of where I go. But one of the things about Durham that I find unfortunate, and that I've always found unfortunate, is that it's very, very possible for two people who both live in Durham, who've lived in Durham forever, to exist in such separate spheres that they never even overlap. And so it's important for me that I want to broaden the scope of where I'm looking with that. I don't want the project to only reflect my vantage point, my story and my voice, but I want to make sure that, you know, I go to those locations that I don't necessarily encounter on a day-to-day basis, and that, you know, that I'm, you know, very intentional and thoughtful about that. The project started with me, but I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about Durham. And I'm also going to be looking for ways to involve the voices of the people who participate in the project more, probably through some, you know, interviews with people. So I'm still kind of figuring that all out, but I'm really, really excited about that. And just a few more words kind of about what this project is about for me. It's about bearing witness to this present moment as it's happening now, and capturing this very transient state. And, you know, my hope is to try to kind of bring some awareness and try to draw the viewer's attention to looking at what's happening and just thinking about it. You know, my personal feelings about the changes are very mixed. There's certain changes that I really enjoy, frankly, and that I love, and that are exciting. You know, I spend a lot more time like downtown with my kids than, you know, we just didn't really go downtown and hang out. There's the farmer's market, there's all these great things. But there are also aspects of the changes that are very concerning and problematic. And so, you know, I am not trying to convince my viewer of anything in this series, but I want to kind of put these images out there and encourage the viewer to think for themselves about these changes. It's also been for me, as a Durhamite, personally, this project has been really a learning process because, as I said, you know, with Durham being my hometown, I always loved Durham in this way that you love your parents when you're a child. You know, now I feel like I'm learning something new about Durham every day, and I'm getting to know Durham in this very intentional way, which has been really exciting and very humbling. Like, I feel like I don't know anything. You know, it's really a process of feeling like I'm getting to know something new and being open to that. And then just one last thing, I've had a number of people, especially people who have been familiar with the work that I've produced since I finished at UNC, comment that this is like such a different direction for my work to be taken, which it is in some ways, as far as my technique and my use of media. Been doing a lot of like exclusively painting, mixed media pieces, very, very different. You know, you might see them and not even know it's the same artist, or you might, I don't know. But I also feel like this project is very reflective of who I am, like at my very, very core. And just to illustrate that, by chance, I was going through some old photos this week, and I found this photograph of me at about age 8. My mother was doing renovations on her house, which is the house that I've lived in since birth. She was tearing down this old kind of decrepit shed and putting up a new one and renovating the kitchen and doing all these renovations, which for me, just my nature, like for me, there's something really poignant and sad about change, just inherently. And so the way that I kind of dealt with this idea that things were changing and they weren't going to be the way they were was to think like, okay, there's got to be a way to capture it as it is now. So I had my mother take a picture of me standing in front of each of these locations. So I came across this picture of me standing in front of this decrepit shed, looking at the camera. Like, this is what it was. Like, you can't forget, this is what it was. And again, like, I'm just struck with this sense, just like I did, you know, when I talked about coming back to Durham, like, that this project just sort of like chose me. Like, there's this very meant to be aspect of this project. Like, it just feels like a homecoming. So, so that's all that I had that I wanted to share, but I wanted to give people an opportunity for Q&A if anybody had any aspects of the project or the series or any particular pieces that they're interested in or want to ask about. I want people to have the opportunity to do that. So.
Moriah, I want to congratulate you. This is just fabulous, and I loved your story as well. That's so much part of the art, and it's just lovely to hear that. And I'm just curious. My question is, if you're looking at the Lakewood neighborhood at all?
Yes.
Because I spend time there, and I have. It also evokes feelings in me about the neighborhood and how it's changing, and it has such a rich history. So
yes.
I'm really interested to see it through your lens.
Yes, and that is not something I've delved into super deep yet, but it is one of the areas that I'm looking at, and I would love to talk to you more. What I've realized in this process of wanting to broaden my scope is that I really need to network and use my resources and ask people, you know, and talk to people, and so I would love to talk to you with your experience about that more. But I am aware of the changes that are, you know, that are happening there, and I'm really interested in that as well. Yeah,
that's great.
Yes, so thank you. And I really welcome that. Like, I hope that also, you know, it's hard. You know, I do have 3-year-old twins that I'm at home with, and it's hard for me to like stay aware of everything that's happening. And so there have been locations already that I missed, you know, and I'm just feeling like that would have been something I would have wanted to capture. And so if anybody sees anything that they're like, this has to be in the series, please, you know, feel free to let me know, because that's important. And again, just wanting to bring in the different voices to the conversation. So, yeah.
So that great green lawn that you were on and was once the site of a giant mill, just like the one that's still standing. So that was a change. That whole West Durham just was invented by someone, and it changed, and it built, and then it went away, and then it came back. So it seems nothing stands still around here. When you were born, there were probably 80,000 people here. Now there are 245. So it's shocking. They try to keep up, but and looking at your pictures, there's something peculiar about them that I'm surprised to see. The rectangles that float, and that's something that a person might. It's something that came from painting. And right now at the Akron, there are some Hans Hofmann paintings there. He was the guy that kind of introduced that in the 40s as a way of. It seemed like a way of drawing you into a deeper space or something. I can't really explain it, but what you've done is we have a deep space. There's pictures of deep space. It's realistic, and you sit sort of with this. I'm not sure what you're doing with those squares and rectangles. You stopped us from going in and made us stop and think. Oh, this is a flat thing that is really, when you look at it, it's like you said, constructed, and so it's sort of an odd. I don't want to say trick, but it's an odd thing that makes us stop and look at a wonder. Because with a landscape photo, you just go right on and skip through them, and figuring out the way that you introduce the people, which are just incredibly important to make the pictures warm, that sort of emotion. That's you went on that. But the other odd thing that you don't see there's a huge crush at the moment for there to be. There's like 2 schools of abstract photography in this town. You know, it's always been around, but there's these people that are making paintings out of Polaroid paper. They squish it, and they call that's abstract photography. So, and then there are everything in between. And Roy Lee presented a show of people. The theme was abstract. So what you've done is the fuzziness around the edges that I'm not sure why you put that there, but it reminds me of the way that edges of glass negatives are, just by their nature. They're fuzzy around, and so that takes us back to an earlier time. It makes us think of that earlier time in photography, where things were abstract because the materials were not as good as digital photography, let's say. So there's just the things that you've selected, you know, it gives us it demonstrates to us, you know, a series of things that you're thinking about doing, and to give us something that we've never seen before. So you win. I mean, you did it.
Thank you.
It's great.
Thank you. And I appreciate your comments about those squares and rectangles, because it's been really interesting. Not everybody likes that, and some people are troubled by it because it's not. They're like, what is it about? You know. And for me, it largely reflects the process. I didn't want the process of how I'm working, which is, you know, like you touched on, this process of deconstructing the image, cutting it into a million different images, not a million, but a couple dozen images, and then printing them and collaging them back together. I didn't want that to get lost, and what I found when I started working is that it kind of did, and I wanted that to be apparent, and that sort of like changing, evolving, moving kind of thing. And I wanted people to stand out from that. You know, I wanted it to be like they're this intact thing, and this change is happening around them. And so for me, it was kind of a way to illustrate that. But it has been really interesting. Some people like it, but also some people are just sort of like, you know, it is, like you said, it is an oddity. It's something people aren't used to seeing, and so people a lot of times want a very logical explanation for that. So I appreciate your thoughts on that.
So in some of the cases were the figures inserted after the landscapes were
No.
made?
Every single piece, and I appreciate you asking about that. Every single piece, if you saw my original photo, it's the same image. Every piece is true to the image that I saw through my viewfinder. Yeah, so every parent was standing in those locations.
So what was the original, was it sheet film, or was it digital?
Digital.
Just digital.
And did you rephotograph after you had done the work on it as the final piece? Like you rephotographed it and then printed it after you painted and stuff, or is this?
These are the originals.
These are
we have
the
the paint on them. There are edition prints made by Wojtek, which he did a really beautiful job where he photographed the pieces. But no, these all have the paint on them, and if you look closely, you can see the layers of the prints.
Right.
That it's not a flat, smooth surface. Which is one of the things I appreciate about his photographs of the work, is that you can see that.
Moriah,
Yes.
because I always want to interpret, I really like the squares, and part of, for me, it's sort of like a kind of a screen, and sort of about how, you know, what is changing, I mean, that will be lost, and there's sort of differing degrees of what will be visible and what will be sort of blocked out. And so for me, it just like enriches the whole concept.
On that picture, I love how one of the baby's looking forward and one's looking back, and the stalwart.
Well, what's fun for me about that is the second piece that I did, which is their best friends, these little boys over here. They're fraternal twins, and the same thing happened, just kind of by chance. I mean, I didn't, in that particular image that I chose, the mom is standing looking away, one of the boys is looking away, and the other boys turning and looking back at the viewer. So I've always thought these two pieces are very interesting, sort of together side by side, because of that element that happened.
I think the element of parents and children of this generation and the next generation of things changing was captured. It brought that emotional context to it that the buildings themselves can't.
Yeah, thank you.
And life being like that you lose your parents, your children grow up, the world changes.
Yeah.
And there's this moment where you capture it in film, and there's these different lenses, like you say, those little squares for me are different ways of looking at each scene from a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
The detail's incredible.
Thank you.
The fencing, and I don't know if y'all have already covered that, but just this one, wow. How you made it come out and pop with the paint and with the photography itself has that detail, but just the additional work on it is incredible.
Thank you.
question technically, did you print the entire image on the background canvas and then piece it, or is it all pieces
It's
that
all
came,
pieces.
came back together to form the final
It's all
piece?
pieces, and so the primary image is generally composed of 16 to 20 images that I printed 8 by 12 and then cut. And then I did go in and reprint certain fragments of those smaller as well.
And is there one other question creatively, is the vignetting or the edging on some of them just sort of piece by piece, or is there any, some of them have it, some of them don't really have it, it's just kind of creative?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of those, and it's funny, you know, I've had people ask me like, well, why did you emphasize this square? Which is a similar question. Some of those are just kind of basic, just intuitive aesthetic decisions. Like I just look at it and I'm like, you know, it's just compositional balance kind of, you know, I want the pieces to be cohesive as a body of work, but I also want them each to have, you know, a slightly different quality to it. So, and some of them just call for it. Like that first piece, it started with that piece. Like that piece, to me, I just intuitively like wanted it to be unclear where the edge is. Like I just wanted that kind of misting, foggy kind of thing. But like on this one, the Liberty Drive-In, it just didn't make sense. You know, it just didn't. And then there was one, this lady and her beautiful little girl right here, actually their piece was the only one where I decided to do misting, fogging around the edges except for the mom. You know what I'm saying? Like it didn't include, because I did it that way initially and it just didn't feel right. But doing it that way kind of creates this sense of distance almost too between the scene and the mom. But and hopefully that answers your question.
Just curious about that process.
I was wondering if you could speak to like the treatment of the sky, like your choice to kind of
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, and honestly, that's probably a question that I need to give a little more thought to, because I don't have a very thoughtful or interesting answer for you on that. Yeah, it was just, and I mean, really, it would have been a lot easier if I had it. Like some of these pieces with the chain link fence, like trying to paint inside of each of the chain links. I mean, it added a lot more, you know, labor and to the work. But yeah, it was just intuitive. Like I wanted. I mean, I think also like all of the colors of the sky are colors the sky can be, but there is sort of like a little bit of a surreal quality to them because they are flat. You know, it's not, you know, skies with clouds and sun. It's this sort of flat plane of solid color that I then brought in other places. And so, yeah, I mean, I just think that was one of those things that I think this is my painting background, like, and my painting background that came from my art teacher who I dedicated the show to, who passed right before this show came up. You know, it was like the way that he taught us to draw and to paint was like from this very intuitive place. It was, you know, that kind of, and so it was just sort of, definitely wasn't a decision that I really analyzed a whole lot, but it was just, yeah.
I love it and it's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you paint photorealistically on occasion?
Yeah. Yes. I don't know if I would call it photorealistically. On occasion. Oh, I mean, my paintings tend to have, I feel like surreal quality is the wrong word, but they're definitely very representational and the subject matter is clear, but I like to have kind of some elements of abstraction in there as well. Yeah.
Can you use photographs as a source for the image that you're
Frequently, yes. Frequently, yeah.
I think there's a huge connection, and you know, we talk about this, but when I met you, I asked you what you do, and you said, I'm a portrait artist.
So there's like a thread for me of seeing your pencil portraits, which were really also very photographic.
Yeah.
And of children and of people, and how that translates to this work. It feels very much like portraiture.
Yeah.
And so there's a connection to your earlier work for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
This is completely off the wall.
Okay.
This is post your discussion, but
Okay.
the thing you brought in here, at 21C now, you go in there and there are these large photo portraits of people.
Yeah.
And then you come to one that looks like a portrait photo of someone, but it's a painting. It's near the reservation desk. That is truly the oddest, one of the oddest things I've seen around here, that someone would be so personal. Anyway. Case closed.
Well, I want to make sure that the people that got here later have a chance to look at the work too. So were there any other questions anybody wanted to ask me before we finish up the talk, formal talk section? Anybody else? Okay, well thank you again so much.